Hello everybody, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. If you're new, please subscribe, like, make sure your bell is shaded all the way in, subscribe, and watch. Today we're talking about an amazing character named Athanasius. We have a view of the early church fathers of the old paintings with the long white beards, but there was actually a wide range of ethnicities among the early church fathers, and today we're telling the story of the African monk who really saved the Trinity. Athanasius was an Egyptian. He lived roughly from 296 to 373 AD. He grew up in a lower-class village on the banks of the Nile, and he spoke Coptic, which was the language of the time. At the age of 5 or so, Athanasius witnessed the greatest persecution to take place under Diocletian. In about 311 AD, Athanasius was 14 years old, and he enjoyed a brief respite from the various persecutions for about a year under the Emperor Maximin. Athanasius' friend, Gregory of Nazianzus, was a doctor of the Eastern Church. He was an expert. He noted that Athanasius, even from a young age, spent all his time meditating in what would become the books of the Old and New Testament during his own lifetime. Athanasius was so moved by the deaths of the martyrs and their willingness to die for Christ that he searched diligently. He knew that there was truth in this story, in this gospel about this teacher from Nazareth. It was not just the books, though, that compelled him regarding the faith. He was mentored in the desert by what we would know later in history as Saint Anthony. He learned about service and prayer and meditation. He wrote the first spiritual biography on Anthony. And that not only served the church, but with it, Athanasius built a whole genre, a whole style of spiritual writing. He's mostly known for his role during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. But Athanasius was only 30 when the council convened. In modern history, he's seen as the key victor of the debates at the council, yet he was only a deacon. He didn't even have a vote to cast there. He was the head pupil of Alexander, a key leader of the Church of Alexandria. He won the debate over the oneness of Jesus and God against Arius and his group, questioning Christ's co-eternality and co-equality with God. Don't be confused when I say oneness of God and Jesus. We often mistakenly discuss the Trinity in the context of the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea. And that's not really right, because the Holy Spirit was not really defined as the third person in the Trinity at that particular council. That being said, Athanasius had already written that he believed the Holy Spirit was co-equal with God and the Son. In fact, it was Athanasius' deep understanding of Jesus and what his earthly ministry meant that gave him the floor at the Council of Nicaea above his more experienced colleagues. He understood that Jesus was the Word incarnate. He understood that the work of the cross was necessary for human salvation and that Jesus was indeed the incarnation of God. It was in his work that for the first time we can see in writing the gospel like we know it today. He presented the atoning death and resurrection of Jesus Christ as three dilemmas. Because of the deep nature of his three dilemmas, the incarnation of Jesus as God on earth is totally necessary. In Athanasius' view, if Jesus is not God, the gospel has no power to forgive or save. Athanasius argued that Jesus had to be God because of three dilemmas. Firstly, humans had corrupted the image of God originally placed in them. Number two, humans' inner beings had become corrupted by sin, as if a disease, chronic, progressive, and fatal. And number three, humans had incurred a debt to a holy, perfect, and just God that they could not pay. Athanasius really single-handedly led the debate to the end and victory at the council. It's not that the Arians were evil or purposely trying to corrupt the gospel. They truly believed in Jesus' atoning work, the same as Athanasius, but they didn't understand the implications of Jesus not being divine, being a created son. They didn't understand the full implications of what that meant for the faith. At Nicaea, it was decided, though, that Jesus was fully God, same substance as the Father, homoousios. In fact, Arius was banished from Alexandria, and his diaconate revoked for heresy. Yet the war was not over. The council made such an impact on Athanasius that it solidified his faith and solidified others' faith in him. He was made a bishop just 3 years later, and he really didn't even want the bishopric, but he did accept it. His leadership was not easy. Constantine and the Arian view of Christ as a created being, God's first and greatest creation, this was reversed just 3 years after the Council of Nicaea. Athanasius and many of the Trinitarian Christians were persecuted, and Arius was reinstated to Alexandria. Athanasius overcame a great deal of adversity to get to the stage at Nicaea, and even after, his testing was not over. It was quite overwhelming. Renewed by Constantine's reversal, the Arians targeted Athanasius with accusations of witchcraft, murder. They said he maimed a guy and cut his hand off. So the Arians held a synod, or a minor council, at Tyre. It's in modern Lebanon, to address these accusations. But Athanasius shows up in person, in the flesh, with the person that he allegedly murdered. So the plots against him didn't stop there, though, even though he had vindicated himself. He personally rode for Constantinople, modern Istanbul, to speak with Constantine about these issues. But the emperor's Arian advisors would not let Athanasius in. So Athanasius waited until a time that he knew Constantine would be riding on horseback, and he hid in the bushes. Constantine rode by, he jumped out. This did not make the emperor happy. In fact, Constantine was angry that he had done it, and his anger was made stronger when one of his pro-Arian advisors lied to Constantine and told him that Athanasius was threatening to cut off grain supplies from Egypt into Rome. While a bold lie, Constantine did exile Athanasius to Trier, which is modern-day Germany. By now, though, Athanasius had such a popular following that riots broke out across the empire for his banishment, particularly in Alexandria. Now, when Constantine died in 337, his 3 sons ruled together and reversed all of the exiles, allowing bishops everywhere to return home. As Athanasius left to return home to Alexandria, though, riots broke out again, this time from the Arians against the return of Athanasius to Alexandria. So seeing the trouble when returning to Alexandria, Athanasius instead went straight to Rome, and he used his lifetime of knowledge and experience to convince the Roman bishop at the time, Julius, to see his side against Arius. He called his the orthodox view of Christianity, and he said his was right. He argued that if Jesus was a creature, like Arius says, a created being, and let's be fair, saying Jesus is a creature makes it sound bad. All they were saying was God was the only one there eternally from the beginning. At some point, he had to have created Jesus. A reasonable argument, not real far out there, right? But anyway, he says that if Jesus was a creature or a created being, there's no power to save in him. Only God could overcome death. So if Jesus was only a creature separate in any way from the Father, his death could not have been atoning for any person. So the war was far from over. In 351, a group of bishops gathered at Sirmium, modern-day Serbia, and they rejected the decision from Nicaea again. Arius had won again. So a few years later, though, Constantius, one of Constantine's 3 sons, ends up becoming the sole emperor, and he enforced Arian Christianity throughout the empire. The new emperor allegedly used force to support and encourage this view of Christianity. Curious, though, about what Athanasius would have to say, he sent 5,000 soldiers. And the story goes that they surrounded the church, where at the time Athanasius happened to be serving communion. And his response was to have his congregation inside sing Psalm 136 as loud as they could. Somehow in the melee, Athanasius fainted and was spirited away, but he spent the rest of his life really on the run. He died in 373. At that time, the Christian world was still really split and predominantly Arian. Yet it would be 8 years later at the Second Ecumenical Council. Let me briefly make a distinction. We talked about the ecumenical, the First Council of Nicaea. We're talking about the Second Ecumenical Council in Constantinople. More minor meetings occurred that were called synods. So now we're talking about the Second Ecumenical Council, the First Council of Constantinople. Now, during this council, they finally gained some footing and upheld what was decided at Nicaea. What we know today as Orthodox Christianity was formed thusly. It would take several more centuries and several more ecumenical councils, though, for the definitions to clarify what that orthodoxy was. But it was largely built on the work of the early church fathers, namely the African Athanasius. Athanasius stood firm to the Trinitarian model that Jesus was God in the flesh, and along with the Holy Spirit made a triune God, one individual, three persons. He was often criticized and lambasted by the popular modalists who called him the Black Dwarf. C.S. Lewis viewed the controversy led by Arius as a modern secular take on evolving forms of Christianity attempting to undermine the pure form of the faith. He says if it were not for men like Athanasius, Orthodox Christianity would have been lost to history. And it almost was. Athanasius' epitaph on his gravestone read, Contra Mundum, Athanasius against the world. Today he's celebrated, but most don't realize that Athanasius, 11 of the early Roman bishops, Tertullian, and several other church fathers were black. And they were just as responsible for the survival of modern Christianity than the white-bearded men we see in the Italian Renaissance portraits. Please don't take this talk today to think that I support CRT in any shape or form. I don't. But I do think that in telling our history, we have to celebrate all the figures that made the church what it was. And boy, reading about Athanasius really opened my eyes to that. What a great figure. Anyway, this has been a fascinating talk, hasn't it? Athanasius, what a guy. Please, on Twitter, come see me there and hashtag Truth First Christianity. That's the hashtag that we're using there on Twitter. You can see me on BitChute and Facebook and Twitter at Evangelist Nick G. You can find me here on YouTube. And you can also go to amazon.com/author/nicholasdgarrett and buy one of the many books I've written. Get the books from the Just Tell Me the Truth About Christianity series. I'm finishing the editing on Just Tell Me the Truth About the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. As always, God bless you, and may your work today bear fruit. Thanks.